Chapter 7 Introduction to Visual Basic. Visual Basic is an object-oriented programming or OOP and an event-driven programming language. It was introduced by Microsoft Company in 1991. It is the successor of Basic Language or Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code. It is quite a powerful language and provides the fastest and easiest ways to create applications for Microsoft Windows. It is commonly used as a front end for most of the commercial software. Features of Visual Basic. Visual Basic is a quite powerful language which provides the fastest and easiest way to create interactive applications for Microsoft Windows. It has the following features. Visual Basic is an object-oriented and event-driven programming language. It provides a collection of ready-to-use controls to create user interfaces. Using these controls, we can quickly design interfaces. It helps to handle events performed by user like mouse clicks and keyboard actions. It provides a collection of mathematical, string and graphical functions. It provides powerful database access controls. It provides ActiveX support, that is, it allows us to use the objects created in other applications such as Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Access, etc. It provides useful debugging and error handling tools. Getting started with Visual Basic. Visual Basic comes packaged with Microsoft Visual Studio software. To start Visual Basic on your computer, follow the given instructions. Click on Start button. Programs. Microsoft Visual Studio 6.0. Microsoft Visual Basic 6.0. When you start Visual Basic, the new project dialog box appears on the screen. As you can see from the figure given below, it provides options to create different types of projects. But you will learn to develop Standard EXE project, which is used to create a general purpose program or application. To start with, click on Standard EXE icon and then click on the Open button. The Visual Basic Development Environment. Visual Basic is not just a language. It is an integrated development environment or IDE in which you can develop, run, test and debug your applications. The Visual Basic IDE consists of the following elements. The title bar displays either the default title of a project like Project 1, Project 2, etc. or the one assigned by the developer. The toolbox consists of all the controls essential for developing a Visual Basic application. Controls are tools such as boxes, buttons, labels and other objects drawn on a form to get input or display output. Form Designer window is used to design the interface of your application. You can add controls, graphics and pictures to a form. Each form in a Visual Basic application has its own Form Designer window. The Form Layout window helps you to position the forms in your application using a small graphical representation of the screen. Properties window lists the property settings such as size, caption or color for the selected form or control. The properties of the selected control can be listed either alphabetically with the exception of the name value or categorized by clicking the respective button. There are different set of properties for each control of the toolbox. The Project Explorer window gives a hierarchical view of all the files inserted into a Visual Basic project. You can open any file by just double-clicking on it or close these branches of the views to get more or less detail. Object Browser window lists objects available for use in your project and gives you a quick way to navigate through methods and properties available for those objects and paste code procedures into your application. You can open the Object Browser window by clicking on the View menu and selecting the Object Browser option. Code Editor window is used for entering the application code. A separate Code Editor window is created for each form or code module in your application. The Toolbox. The Toolbox provides a set of RAD or Rapid Application Development tools or controls for creating different types of input-output interfaces called forms for an application. The user interacts with these interfaces or forms to provide the inputs required for the processing and receives prompts or responses from the application through these interfaces only. See the toolbox given on the next page carefully to identify the icons of various controls. Visual Basic Toolbox. Pointer is only used to select, resize or move a control that has already been drawn on a form. Picture box is a container control which is used to display graphical images. The label control displays text on a form that user cannot edit. The text box control holds text that the user can either enter or edit. Frame control allows you to create a graphical or functional grouping for controls. The command button creates a button that the user can choose to carry out a command. The checkbox control creates a box that the user can choose to indicate if something is true or false, or to display multiple choices from which the user can choose more than one. Option buttons or radio buttons appear in groups and the user can choose only one of them. Combo box is a combination list box and text box. The list box control contains a list of options from which user can choose one or more. The horizontal scroll bar helps to quickly navigate through a long list of items or a large amount of information. The vertical scroll bar helps to quickly navigate through a long list of items or a large amount of information. The timer control generates timer events at set intervals. This control is invisible at runtime. Drive list box is used to display the drives on the system in a drop-down list from which the user can select any one. Dial list box is used to display the list of all folders in the current drive and lets the user move up and down in the hierarchy of the folders. File list box is used to display a list of all files in the current folder. Shape control allows the user to draw a variety of geometrical shapes on a form at design time. Rectangle, rounded rectangle, square, rounded square, oval or circle. Line control is used to draw a variety of line styles on your form at design time. Image control displays an image from a bitmap, icon or meta file on your form. The data control provides point and click access to data stored in databases through bound controls on your form. OLE control allows you to link or embed objects from other applications such as Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. Structure of a Visual Basic application. A Visual Basic application is called as project. We can create different types of projects in Visual Basic for different types of tasks like database projects, web-based projects, DHTML project, ActiveX DLL projects, etc. But the most common type of the project, which is used for general purpose programming problems and which are learnt by beginners, is called a standard EXE project. A standard EXE Visual Basic project is a collection of the following modules and files. A Visual Basic project consists of one or more forms. A form consists of one or more controls on which events take place. Each event module is coded by the programmer to respond to an event occurring on a form control. Form. A form is an interface that contains the graphic elements of the Visual Basic application, which is used to take input data from the user and to show the output or messages to the user. Event. The occurrence of an action like single click, double click, key press, mouse over on a form is called as an event. Event module. It is the set of Visual Basic commands which are written to respond to an event. Building a Visual Basic application. To build a Visual Basic application, we need to follow the steps given below. Draw the interface. First of all, an interface is prepared using suitable controls on a form, depending upon the kind of inputs required for running or processing the application. A Visual Basic project. On this basis, a Visual Basic application is said to have an SDI or Single Document Interface or MDI or Multiple Document Interface. Set properties. After the layout of the form is prepared using the necessary controls, the next step is to set the properties for each control. The properties of a control only determine the characteristics and functions that can be associated with each control. The properties can be defined by selecting the property values from the Properties window or through coding in the Visual Basic editor. Write the events code. The final step is to write the methods or sub-procedures for handling different types of events that may take place on the form controls during runtime, like click event, key press event, drag drop mouse over, etc. Events add functionality to a form. The most commonly used event is the click event, which you will learn in this lesson. It is at the code writing stage when it becomes important to choose appropriate events for each control. To do this, double-click on the control the event will be used for, or click on this icon in the project window, usually top right of screen. A code window should now be displayed similar to the one shown. The left-hand drop-down box provides a list of all controls used by the current form, the form itself, and a special section called General Declarations. The corresponding drop-down box on the right displays a list of all events applicable to the current control, as specified by the left-hand drop-down box. Events displayed in bold signify that code has already been written for them. Unbold events are unused. Example: building an application in Visual Basic to display the sum of two numbers entered by user. Step 1. Draw the interface. As shown in the screenshot, use two text boxes to accept the numbers, a label for the plus sign, a command button for the is equal to sign and another label for the answer. Step 2. Set properties. Set only the most essential properties of the text boxes, label buttons and the command button like name and captions from the properties window as given below. Step 3. Write the event's code. Making the click event is very simple. Just select the command button with the mouse and double-click. Visual Basic Editor window will open. You can see on the top right there is a click drop-down list. This is known as an event handler. Write code for the click event. Firstly, the user. Step 4. Run the program. Run the program by clicking the Run menu and selecting the Start option. You can also press F5 key to run a program. Enter the two numbers and click on the command button. Observe what happens. Each time a digit changes, the answer is recalculated and shown in the label. Building a visual. Set it or the event. Step 1. Label. Write code. You can also enter the two numbers and click on the command button. Each time a digit changes, the answer is recalculated. Saving a Visual Basic project. To save a Visual Basic project, Step 1. Choose Save Form 1 As from the File menu and assign a name to the form. Step 2. Choose Save Project As from the File menu and assign a relevant name to the project. When you save a Visual Basic project to a disk, the following three files are created: Visual Basic Project file or .vbp file, Form file or .frm file for each form of the Visual Basic project, Module files or .bas files for each module of the Visual Basic project. Use the Windows Explorer or any desktop windows to check that all files have been saved. Opening an existing Visual Basic project. To open an existing project, follow the steps given below. Step 1. Choose Open Project from the File menu. Step Running and viewing the project. Once an application. Step 2. Double-click project file name to load it. Running and viewing the project. Once an application is coded, it can be run by clicking on the Start icon from the toolbar. You can then trigger the events by clicking on the command buttons and check their outputs. To pause, press break, and to terminate, use End icon. Debugging the Visual Basic code. When you complete a project and click on the Start button and run your application, if the program does not run as expected, calculations give wrong results, and other options do not work, what would you do? Of course, you need to remove the errors. But before learning to remove errors, let us discuss about the types of errors. Types of errors. There are three main types of errors that may occur in a program. These are syntax errors. Syntax errors happen when you mistype a command or write an incomplete structure. Visual Basic detects some of these syntax errors as you write the code. For example, runtime errors. Runtime errors occur when Visual Basic tries carrying out an operation that is impossible, like dividing by 0 or calling a non-existent file. Logic errors. The logic error is said to occur when the code does not work as expected. This is because of flaws in the logic used in coding. The only way to fix this type of error is by testing and analyzing your code. Debugging tools in Visual Basic. Visual Basic provides very good tools to remove the above-mentioned errors in a program. You can easily use them once you are familiar with their use and the icons to invoke them. Let us learn about them. Start runs the application from the startup form or submain specified on the General tab of the Project Properties dialog box. If in break mode, the Start button's tooltip text changes to Continue. Break stops execution of a program temporarily. Click the Continue button to resume running the program. End stops running the program and returns to design mode. Locals window displays the current value of local variables. Immediate window displays the immediate window if it is not displayed. The immediate window allows you to execute code or query values while the application is in break mode. Watch window displays the watch window if it is not displayed. The watch window displays the values of selected expressions. Quick watch displays the current value of the expression the cursor is on while in break mode. The expression can easily be added to the watch window. Visual Basic's Code Windows Help. Visual Basic supplies you with all the help you need. As soon as Visual Basic's code editor recognizes that you are entering a function, the editor immediately displays pop-up help that displays the function's format as shown below. When you type a control's name with a dot, Visual Basic also displays the list of properties permissible for a particular type of control. Sample applications. Problem 1. Visual Basic application to make simple calculator. Coding. 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 Problem 2. Visual Basic application to compute the simple interest. First, draw the interface. Second, write the coding. Visual Basic controls, properties and events. As discussed earlier, Visual Basic consists of a set of controls which are used to design interface or input-output forms from an application. Every control has a set of properties, events and methods associated with it. Now, let us move ahead and learn about each control in detail. Command button. Command buttons are used in almost every Visual Basic application to add an action or event such as click, double-click, mouse over or key press etc. to a control on a form. Command buttons determine when the user wants to do something such as exit the application or begin printing. Anytime a command button is to be added to an application, do it according to the following steps. Step 1. Draw and size the command button on the form. Step 2. Change the command button's name and caption properties. The caption property holds the text that appears on the command button. Step 3. Add code to the command button's event procedure. Although the command button control supports dozens of properties, you will set only the name and caption properties in most cases. Similarly, although command button controls support over a dozen events, you will need to write code only for the click event in most cases. Common command button properties. Property. Description. Label button. Labels are used to place titles in forms and to label text boxes so that users know what to type into the text box. When you place labels on a form, you will almost always set the label control's name property and type a new caption value. In addition, you can change the font, color, and style properties. The following table lists the most common label control properties that you will set as you work with the label control. Common label properties. Property. Description.
Text boxes. Text boxes are used to accept user input. Although several other controls accept user input, text boxes are perhaps the easiest to set up or respond to. In addition, a text box is easy for user to use and they see text boxes on Windows forms all the time. The following table lists the common properties associated with text boxes.
Form control. Form control is not present in the toolbox. It opens by default when you start a new project. The form is called as the container or parent control of all other controls. It serves as the background of your application. The form's properties help set the stage for the rest of the controls. The table given below lists only the most common properties you'll need. Common form properties. Property. Description. The image control. The image control is used to display graphics on form window. The image is displayed in it by setting its picture property. The picture property determines which image appears inside the image control's boundaries on the form. When you click the picture property, Visual Basic displays an ellipsis button. You can click to display a load picture dialog box, similar to a file open dialog box. The load picture dialog box displays a list of files with the graphic extensions like BMP, CUR, DIB, EMF, GIF, ICO, JPG and WMF. You can display any of these image files by using the load picture method as shown below. If you want to change the image's size, adjust the height and width properties, remember to set the stretch property to true if you want the image to resize and not be clipped. Also, set the visible property to true to make the image visible on the form. If the border style property is set to 1 fixed single, you will know where the image control edges appear in relation to the image. The image control enlarges to hold the entire image. The picture box control. The picture box control is also used to show graphics on the form. It works almost exactly like the image control, with the following differences. The picture box control supports more properties, events and methods than the image control. The picture box control consumes more resources than the image control, and therefore it is not as efficient. The picture box control automatically clips the image if it will not fit within the picture box control's borders that you set when you place the picture box control. Remember, the picture box control does not always shrink to fit. The auto size property, normally set to false, determines how the image control responds to a loaded image's size. If auto size is false, the control does not resize to fit the image. If, however, you change auto size to true, the image control does resize to the image's measurements and does not clip. Therefore, the image will shrink or expand as needed to fit the image control size when you set auto size to true. Use the align property to determine where on the form the picture box control appears. You can place the picture control to any side of the form window control using the align property values described in the table. Possible align property values. Property value. Description. Frames, option buttons and check boxes. A frame is a control that borders other controls and groups them together. It can be used in conjunction with option buttons and check boxes. If you have to place 4 option buttons below each other on your form, you wouldn't be able to make 2 selections. Therefore, you would use 2 frames to create 2 groups. Frames also help make things more visually clear for the user by separating different controls from each other and grouping those that are similar. As a general rule, always include option buttons and check boxes inside of frames. To create a frame, simply draw it onto your form, and to place option buttons or check boxes into the frame, simply draw them inside the frame. The value properties of these controls helps you to check whether the user has selected these controls or not. Option 1 value is equal to true. Option 1 value is equal to false. Checkbox value is equal to checked. Checkbox value is equal to unchecked. Option buttons are used quite often in the Windows environment, as they can only have two outputs, 0 and 1. These get used to process the form.
Checkboxes. Checkboxes help you to select multiple options.
List box and combo box. List boxes and combo boxes are used to supply a list of options to the user. The toolbox icons representing these two controls are shown here. List box. A list box is used when the user is to be presented with a fixed set of selections. That is, a choice must be made only from the items displayed. There is no possibility of the user typing in an alternative. For example, a list of the days in a week, the available modules in an elective catalog, the holiday destinations available from a particular airport, or the types of treatment offered by a beauty salon. To create a list box, double-click on the toolbox icon. Drag the resulting box into place on the form and size it according to the data it will hold. Then, type the list items in the list property in the Properties window. Combo boxes. Combo boxes also provide data to the user in a list form. It also has the option of becoming a drop-down list. Take a look at these samples. A few useful input-output functions. Message box. A message box is used when you need to display any message or advice to the user. For example, suppose the user is to enter marks of all subjects to be used in calculation of percentage and grading. Users do not always know what is expected of them. So, a message box can pop up when the user enters a wrong value. And the message box can explain what the user needs to enter. If the user enters an invalid value, your program could display an error message, such as the one shown in the adjoining figure. Syntax. For example, you can also assign a message box function to an integer variable. The variable will hold the return value, and that value will indicate the button the user clicked. Message boxes can display multiple buttons such as OK, Cancel, etc. Here is the format of the message box function. For example, the following table lists the 7 possible message box values to test which button is pressed by the user. Message box return values: named, constant, value description. Input box. A message box is a dialog box used to display a message to user. An input box, on the other hand, can be thought of as a message box with a text box. An input box displays a prompt to the user and obtains text input from the user. The text box controls that you have seen are used for getting fixed input values from the user, such as data values with which the program will compute. Input boxes are used when the user must respond to certain kinds of questions that arise only under certain conditions. Input boxes always give the user a place to respond with an answer pressing enter or clicking OK. The user can also click cancel to cancel the data entry. Visual Basic Programming Fundamentals. In the previous sections, you learned to design forms and assign properties to various types of controls available in Visual Basic. To add functionality to different controls placed on the form, you need to learn programming in Visual Basic. When we start learning any programming language, it is essential that we familiarize ourselves with the terminology of that programming language. We need to learn the syntaxes and usage of the statements and control structures provided by the language so that we can make use of the power of these statements in our coding. Variables. We often need to store values temporarily when performing calculations with Visual Basic. In Visual Basic, we use variables to temporarily store values during the execution of an application. For example, we might want to calculate several values, compare them, and perform different operations on them depending on the result of the comparison. We need to retain the values if we want to compare them, but we don't need to store them in a property. Visual Basic, like most programming languages, uses variables for storing values. Variables have a name, that is the word we used to refer to the value the variable contains, and a data type, which determines the kind of data the variable can store. A variable serves as a placeholder in memory for an unknown value. Variables make it extremely easy for you to pass information from one control to another in the program. A variable is a named reference of a memory location where a data value of defined data type is stored temporarily. Example: the expression returns a different sales total each time, depending on what values the user provides in price and quantity sold variables. The variables allow us to make a calculation without having to know in advance what the actual inputs are. In this example, the data type of price is currency. The data type of quantity sold is an integer. Variables can represent many other values as well: text values, dates, various numeric types, even objects. Data types. Data types control the internal storage of data in Visual Basic. There are a number of data types available in Visual Basic that allow you to optimize the code for speed and size. Visual Basic provides the following data types: byte, integer, long, single, double, string, date, variant, currency, boolean, object. Data type defines the type of information the variable stores. Some examples of data types include string, integer, and currency. Data type. Description. Declaring variables in Visual Basic. Declaring a variable means that you are creating a variable and defining its data type. Visual Basic automatically initializes numeric variables to 0 and text strings or variants to empty. You can use a variable in a program only after declaring it. Dim statement is used in Visual Basic to declare a variable. The syntax of declaration is as given below. Example: when using the dim statement, variables are only visible in their current form or module. In order to allow a variable to function throughout the project, you are going to have to change the variable scope. In other words, replace dim with another statement. Rules for naming variables in Visual Basic. It must begin with an alphabetic character. It should not contain spaces. It cannot contain a period or any of these characters. Strong data in variables. An assignment statement. Like variables, constants also store values. A constant is a meaningful name that takes the place of a number or string that does not change throughout the execution of an application. Creating own constants. The body of constant names should be a mixed case with capitals initiating each word. The syntax for declaring a constant is: example, operators. Operators are the symbols or words that trigger an action on the given operands. Visual Basic provides a range of operators for performing different types of arithmetical, logical, and comparison operations. The types of operators available in Visual Basic are as given below. Arithmetic operators used to perform mathematical calculations. Assignment operator used to assign a value to a property or variable. Comparison operator used to perform comparisons. Concatenation operators used to combine strings. Logical operators, operators used to perform logical operations. Control structures. Control structures allow you to control the flow of the program's execution. If left unchecked by control flow statements, a program's logic will flow through statements from left to right and top to bottom. While some very simple programs can be written with only this unidirectional flow, and while some flows can be controlled by using operators to regulate precedence of operations, most of the power and utility of any programming language comes from its ability to change statement order with structures and loops. A set of statements which allows you to control the flow of the program's execution are called control structures. Types of control structures. Control structures are of the following types: decision constructs, looping constructs, decision constructs. Decision constructs can test conditions and then, depending on the results of that test, perform different operations. The decision structures that Visual Basic supports include if, then, and if construct. If is a conditional statement which allows you to execute a certain section of code in one particular instance and another in a different one. The syntax of the if statement is as given below. Remember, the if statement must be closed with end if, otherwise the compiler will prompt syntax error. Example: as you can see, there is an opening of the if condition and a closing of it. Below is an example of where we omit the end if. If then else. If then else block is used to define several blocks of statement, one of which will execute. Syntax: Visual Basic first tests condition 1. If it finds the condition 1 true, it executes the corresponding statement block and then executes the code following the end if. As an option, we can include an else statement block, which Visual Basic executes if the condition is false. Example: we can also use the single line form for short, simple tests. However, the block form provides more structure and flexibility than the single line form and is usually easier to read, maintain, and debug. With the single line form, it is possible to have multiple statements executed as the result of an if-then decision. All statements must be on the same line and separated by colons, as in the following statement. Looping constructs. Loop structures allow you to execute one or more lines of code repetitively. The loop structures that Visual Basic supports include do loop, for next, while when. We will discuss only for next loop in this chapter. For next loop. A for loop uses a variable called a counter that increases or decreases in value during each repetition of the loop. Syntax: the arguments counter, start, end, and increment are all numeric. The increment argument can be either positive or negative. If increment is positive, start must be less than or equal to end, or the statements in the loop will not execute. If increment is negative, start must be greater than or equal to end for the body of the loop to execute. If step is not set, then increment defaults to 1. In executing the for loop, Visual Basic follows the steps given. Step 1. Sets counter equal to start. Step 2. Tests to see if counter is greater than end. If so, Visual Basic exits the loop. If increment is negative, Visual Basic tests to see if counter is less than end. Step 3. Executes the statements. Step 4. Increments counter by 1 or by increment if it is specified. Step 5. Repeat steps 2 to 4. Below are examples of how to use a for loop in Visual Basic. Example 1. The following loop prints counting from 10 to 1. Output. Example 2. The following loop prints counting from 1 to 10. Output. Sample applications. Problem 1. Design a Visual Basic application to print the squares of first 8 natural numbers. Coding. Problem 2. A Visual Basic application to prepare students' result on the basis of marks entered. Coding.